we talk about what is hardening. It is God's work to distinguish his people from the rest, to make a distinction between the world and those who belong to God. That's what hardening is about. It is the separating work. To lead us to the second question, it was like, okay, then how does it happen, right? Which is the big question on our minds is, how is it that this hardening takes place? To which then Paul gives us the various quotes from the scriptures here. He begins to unfold it for us so we can understand it. How has this taken place? Well, notice, let me say this. He quotes a couple of passages. He quotes from Isaiah chapter 29, and he quotes from Deuteronomy. And then quoting from these passages, he puts together in verse 8 two different verses to bring about this theme. Notice as he says, God gave them a spirit of stupor, eyes to see not and ears to hear not, down to this very day. Here's what Isaiah 29 says. You can just listen. It says this. For the Lord has poured over you a spirit of deep sleep. He has shut your eyes, the prophets, and he has covered your heads, the seers. What has God done? As he said through the Old Testament, God has taken away your prophets. He has taken away your messengers. He has taken away the truth. And it has blinded you. It has taken away your sight. It has closed your eyes. How then, the question would be, how does God harden? The answer is by God taking away truth and the revelation of truth. By God pulling away, that's why it says God gave them a spirit of stupor. This is quoting from the Deuteronomy passage, eyes to see not and ears to hear not, quoting from the Isaiah passage, meaning you cannot see or hear or understand truth and has left you in a state of stupor. Can illustrate this. If you turn over to Matthew chapter 13, this is illustrated in Matthew chapter 13 specifically. At a critical point in Jesus' ministry, after he had been rejected by the religious leaders, Jesus changes and starts to speak to the crowds and multitudes in parables. And when he began to speak to them in parables, notice verse 10 of Matthew chapter 13. The disciples came to Jesus and said to him, "Why do you speak to them in parables?" Meaning, why don't you just speak as plainly as you used to speak? Why don't you continue to communicate to the crowds like you did at the beginning and like you do with us, explaining plainly what you mean? Verse 11, and Jesus answered them, "To you it has been granted to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been granted. For whoever has, to him more shall be given, and he will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has shall be taken away from them. Therefore I speak to them in parables, because while seeing they do not see, and while hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand. In their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is being fulfilled, which says, you will keep on hearing, but will not understand. You will keep on seeing, but will not perceive. For the heart of this people has become dull. And with their ears they scarcely hear, and they have closed their eyes. Otherwise they would see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and return, and I would heal them. But blessed are your eyes, because they see, and your ears, because they hear. For truly I say to you that many prophets and righteous men desired to see what you see, and did not see it, and hear what you hear, and did not hear it." Jesus explained to his disciples here what was taking place in the multitudes as they had rejected Christ. They had rejected him, hardened their hearts, turned away from the hearing of the truth, and so God pulled back his word, his revelation to them, just as Isaiah had prophesied. Yeah, they had eyes, but they weren't seeing, and they had ears, but they weren't hearing, They had abandoned the truth. They had become dull of hearing. They wouldn't hear. They wouldn't receive the truth. They wouldn't come under it. And this was the work of hardening that took place. God pulling himself away. God pulling back his revelation, pulling back his prophets, pulling back his truth, to which then the heart carried itself off to where it would go. Hardness and rejection. Back to Romans chapter 11. That is the illustration of how it worked. Romans 11 just drives it home. Again, quoting from Old Testament scriptures, reminding them God gave them a spirit of super. Gave them over to their own sin. Gave them over to their own devices, turned them over to pursue the things they wanted to pursue, turned them over to their own foolish pursuits, and pulled back and away his truth. They have eyes to see, and ears to hear, but they won't hear, and they won't receive, and they won't come under, even though they're available, even though it's made known to them, even though they could find it, they won't, because they've hardened. And they've set up, as David says, their table became a snare and a trap, a stumbling block and a retribution to them. They went about their own wisdom and their own pursuits, setting up their own ways, and it only became a trap for them. Isn't that the heart of man? This man has become proud, confident in his own ways, confident in his own understanding, confident in his own pursuits, that he has gone headlong away from God, moving away from a knowledge of the truth, moving away from revelation into his own wisdom and understanding, and this has only hardened his heart. This is how it is taking place. Man moving away from God, replacing God with his own wisdom and understanding. Again, all this is the reflection of what Paul said back in Romans chapter 1, in verse 18 and following. God gave them over. He just gave them over to their own desires, gave them over to their own pursuits. So the work of hardening here, those whom he has chosen, he has called to himself as a gracious choice. To the rest, he has turned over to their own pursuits. And he turned them over not by driving them into wickedness, because that's what many tend to think about hardening. They tend to think about God pushing somebody to do evil, as if God is making you or making the non-elect do acts of evil. That's not what is demonstrated. What is demonstrated here is God withholding from them or pulling away from them his revelation. God isn't the active agent causing them to do wickedness so that he can judge them. Causing, like a child who provokes his sibling to transgress one of the parents' laws and rules so that the child can get in trouble, as if, God is sitting there kind of provoking them to engage in wickedness. No, God just goes silent. That's the danger for us. The danger is when God goes silent and we no longer have his word, his message. What happens in the hearts of people when God goes silent or his message has been overruled or changed? What it brings about isn't softening, it isn't character. What it brings about is actually hardening and separation. And for the purpose, Paul says, this is for the purpose of distinguishing between the chosen who have obtained righteousness and those who have not. That's why he does this, to bring out a distinction.